Whisperwood. I don't know why I went into Whisperwood. Everyone in town knew the stories, how the forest seemed alive, how people who wandered in were never quite the same when they came back. If they came back at all. But I wasn't from town. I was just passing through, crashing at an old friend's place while my life unraveled. The kind of unraveling where it feels like the world's ending. Dead-end job, girlfriend left me, nowhere to go. My friend Matt had said, "Stay as long as you need, man." And I took him up on it. That's how I ended up hearing about the forest. "Don't go past the tree line," Matt warned one night. "Whisperwood doesn't like visitors." I laughed. "What does that even mean? Does it have a no trespassing sign?" Matt's face was serious. "It's not a joke. It's not like normal woods. It watches you. And it takes things. Like a mugger?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't laugh. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't planning to go far, just to see what all the fuss was about. It was early afternoon, sunlight pouring through a crisp autumn sky. Perfect weather for a walk. The forest was denser than I expected. The moment I crossed into the shadows, the air changed, cooler, heavier, like stepping into a cave. The quiet was uncanny. No birds, no wind in the branches. Just stillness. It was like the woods were holding their breath. I followed a faint trail, crunching leaves underfoot, and told myself I'd turn back in 10 minutes. Maybe 15. But then I noticed something odd. Trees with deep, claw-like gouges carved into their trunks. The marks didn't look like animal scratches. They were too deliberate, almost like symbols, spiraling around the bark in patterns I couldn't place. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind. It sounded human, but too soft to make out. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but my feet stayed rooted. I strained to listen, and the voice grew louder, no words, just the susurrus of sound, pulling me deeper. I don't know how long I followed it. The forest seemed to twist and stretch, paths vanishing behind me. Trees loomed closer, their branches like skeletal arms. My phone had no signal, of course, but I hadn't wandered that far. Or so I thought. Then I saw her. She stood in a clearing, pale and thin, her back to me. Her dress was old-fashioned, tattered around the edges, and her long, black hair hung limp. At first, I thought she was lost, like me. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Didn't even turn. I stepped closer, my voice faltering. "Miss?" That's when she moved, slowly, too slowly, turning her head just enough for me to see the edge of her face. Her skin was gray, like ash. Her eyes were black pits, and her mouth curved into a too-wide smile, her teeth jagged and sharp. The whispering exploded in my ears, a cacophony of voices screaming all at once. I ran. Branches tore at me as I stumbled through the forest, the whispers chasing me, growing louder, angrier. It was as if the forest itself was alive, its roots and vines reaching out to snare me. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until I saw the break in the trees. I collapsed onto the roadside, gasping for air. Whisperwood loomed behind me, its shadow stretching unnaturally far. For a moment, I thought I saw her face between the trees, watching. Matt found me an hour later, sitting in the dirt. He didn't ask what happened, just helped me up and drove me back to his place in silence. That night, I locked the doors and windows, but I couldn't sleep. The whispers were still in my head, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Around midnight I noticed something strange, my shadow on the wall. It didn't match my movements. It stood still while I paced, and when I stopped, it tilted its head, watching me. I don't think I left Whisperwood. Not entirely. It's been weeks now. I don't sleep much anymore, and when I do, I dream of trees. I hear the whispers everywhere, on the wind, in the hum of the fridge, in the creak of floorboards. They're getting louder. And last night, I found dirt under my fingernails. I haven't been back to the forest. But I think it's coming for me. I didn't tell Matt about the whispers or the dirt under my nails. He'd already looked at me funny when I mentioned seeing someone in the forest. Instead, I pretended I was fine and spent the next few days trying to convince myself that what happened in Whisperwood was just some bizarre hallucination brought on by stress. But things didn't stay quiet. It started with small things. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed wrong. Subtle at first, shadows that didn't quite align, eyes that lingered a second too long after I turned away. Then objects around the house began moving on their own. My phone would vanish from the counter, only to reappear in my pocket hours later. Lights flickered in the middle of the night, even though Matt swore the wiring was fine. One morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bed. They weren't mine. Matt left for work early, and I spent the day in a haze, staring at the footprints until the sun went down. I finally worked up the courage to clean them, scrubbing the hardwood until my hands ached. That's when I saw the writing. It was faint, scratched into the varnish like a whisper carved into the wood. 4 words, looping and jagged. You brought it back. I dropped the rag and stumbled backward, knocking over the bucket of soapy water. My head spun. This wasn't happening. I hadn't brought anything back. I'd barely even gone into the forest. That's when I heard the laugh, soft and airy, coming from just behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The room was empty. But the whispering had started again. That night, I barricaded myself in the bedroom. I shoved a dresser in front of the door and left the lamp on, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I didn't know who I was planning to call. Matt, maybe? The cops? What would I even tell them? The whispers crept through the walls, growing louder. They weren't just voices now, they were breathing, shuffling, scratching. It was everywhere. I tried to drown it out with music, but my phone glitched, the screen flickering before shutting off completely. Then, the lamp flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness. My breathing was loud in my ears, ragged and uneven. I reached blindly for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I heard it. The faint creak of the floorboards just outside the door. Something was out there. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. The whispers were louder now, seeping under the door, filling the room with their static hiss. The doorknob rattled, slow at first, then violently. The dresser shifted an inch. Then another. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting back a scream. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse. Then came a single knock at the door, deliberate and heavy. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Another knock. And another, each one louder, more insistent. And then, nothing. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, waiting for the next knock, the next sound. But there was only silence. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the light. The lamp was back on. The whispers were gone. The dresser hadn't moved an inch. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? I pulled the dresser away and cracked the door open, peeking into the hallway. It was empty, the house silent. And then I saw the mirror. The hallway mirror at the end of the corridor. My reflection wasn't facing me. It stood with its back turned, staring into the shadows. Slowly it turned its head, not enough for me to see its face, but enough to make my blood run cold. I slammed the door shut, trembling. This wasn't just the forest. It was something else. Something alive, something watching me. Something I'd brought back. The next morning, I told Matt I needed to leave. I couldn't explain why. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. He offered to drive me to the bus station, but I refused. I didn't want him getting too close to whatever this was. I packed a bag and left before he got home from work. As I walked to the edge of town, I felt the forest shadow looming behind me, the air colder with each step. The whispers were faint now, just on the edge of hearing, but they never stopped. I don't know where I'm going. I don't think it matters. Because when I looked at my reflection in a shop window as I passed, I saw it watching me. And it smiled. I didn't make it far. The bus station wasn't even that far from Matt's place, maybe a 15-minute walk, but the air grew heavier with every step. The farther I got from Whisperwood, the more my body resisted, like I was trying to wade through water. The whispers were faint now, just a constant buzz at the base of my skull, but I could feel them, pressing against my thoughts. I reached the bus station just as the last evening bus pulled in. The driver looked half asleep, his eyes bloodshot as he waved me on board. I sank into a seat near the back, keeping my bag close to my chest. It was almost empty. I'd left most of my things at Matt's. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The bus was mostly empty, save for a few quiet passengers. An older man in a shabby coat snored softly near the front. A woman in a long dress stared out the window, her face obscured by shadows. And a kid, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, sat directly across from me, clutching a ragged stuffed bear. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I realized he wasn't holding the bear like a toy. He was gripping it like a lifeline, his knuckles white. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. I tried to ignore him, looking out my own window instead. The scenery blurred by, the town fading into dark fields. But no matter how long I stared, I couldn't shake the feeling of his gaze. "You can't leave," the boy whispered. My heart jolted. I turned back to him, but his lips weren't moving. He was still staring at me, his eyes dark and hollow. His bear was limp in his hands now, its head tilted at an odd angle. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he pointed. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and pointed out the window beside me. I hesitated, then turned to look. And there it was. Whisperwood. The bus was passing by the edge of the forest, its twisted trees looming in the moonlight. Their branches clawed at the sky, and the shadows between them seemed alive, writhing and shifting. My breath caught in my throat. I started to say, but when I turned back to the boy, his seat was empty. The whispers surged all at once, louder than ever, drowning out my thoughts. I clutched my head, gasping for air as they filled the bus, wrapping around me like vines. The passengers didn't seem to notice. The driver didn't flinch. But they weren't normal whispers anymore. They were voices. Familiar voices. "Come back," they said. "You belong to us." The bus screeched to a halt, jerking me forward. The driver stood, stretching like nothing was wrong. "Last stop," he said flatly. I looked out the window. My stomach dropped. I was back. The bus had stopped at the edge of Whisperwood. The tree line loomed just a few feet away, the shadows darker than ever. "No," I whispered. "No, I didn't, this isn't." But the driver didn't wait. He turned and walked to the front, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. One by one, the other passengers followed him. The old man shuffled off the bus, the woman with the shadowed face close behind. None of them said a word. They just stepped into the forest, vanishing into the darkness. When I turned back to my seat, the boy was there again, staring at me with empty eyes. "You can't leave," he repeated. The bus lights flickered and went out. I don't remember getting off the bus. I don't remember walking back into the forest, but somehow, I was there again, the trees towering over me, their branches twisting like grasping fingers. The whispers were everywhere now, louder than ever, a storm of voices overlapping until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. And then, the clearing. She was there again, standing in the same spot, her back to me. The pale woman in the tattered dress. But this time, she was humming, a low, eerie tune that sent chills down my spine. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. She stopped humming. Slowly, she turned her head, just enough for me to see the edge of that terrible smile. "You brought it back," she said, her voice like wine through dead leaves. "I don't understand," I cried, taking a step back. "What do you want?" Her smile widened, impossibly so, her jagged teeth gleaming in the faint moonlight. "You." The ground beneath me shifted. Roots erupted from the earth, coiling around my ankles, dragging me down. I clawed at the dirt, screaming, but the forest didn't care. The whispers grew deafening, a symphony of malice. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed. Matt's place. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, warm and bright. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I saw the mud under my nails. And the whispers started again. I didn't tell Matt about waking up with mud under my nails. What could I even say? He already thought I was a mess. Instead, I told him I needed to head back to the city, maybe crash with some other friends. He offered to help, but I brushed him off, saying I'd catch a bus later that day. But I didn't leave. I couldn't. Every time I packed my bag and reached for the front door, something stopped me, an invisible weight, like chains pulling me back. The whispers were always there, just under the surface, murmuring things I couldn't quite understand. That night, I decided to leave anyway. Whatever was happening, I couldn't face it here. Matt went to bed early, and I grabbed my bag, quietly slipping out the door and into the cold night air. The town was silent. Too silent. No crickets, no distant hum of cars, not even the sound of the wind. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting. I walked fast, sticking to the main road. The streetlights flickered, but I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look into the shadows. I was halfway to the bus station when I saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the road, motionless. Pale and thin, wearing a tattered dress, her long black hair hanging limp. Her. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought she hadn't noticed me. But then her head tilted, just slightly, as if listening. And even though her back was to me, I knew she was smiling. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran. The road stretched endlessly before me, the town's familiar landmarks twisting and warping until they were unrecognizable. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud, the whispers growing louder with every step. Finally I stopped, gasping for air. My legs burned, my chest heaving, but I was back where I'd started, the edge of Whisperwood. The pale woman stood beneath the trees, her smile visible even in the dark. She raised one hand, long and skeletal, and pointed into the forest. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not going back in there." The whispers surged, an overwhelming tide of sound. They weren't just in my ears anymore, they were in my head, my chest, my very bones. The ground trembled beneath me, and the air grew so thick it was hard to breathe. She didn't move, just kept pointing. And then, the trees opened. I can't explain how it happened. One moment the forest was a wall of impenetrable darkness, and the next, a narrow path stretched before me, lined with twisting roots and clawing branches. The whispers softened, almost inviting, like they were calling me home. I should have run the other way. I should have screamed, fought, done anything else. But my feet moved on their own, dragging me forward, step by reluctant step. The path wound deeper into the forest, the air growing colder with every step. The trees loomed closer, their bark covered in those same strange, claw-like symbols. The whispers were louder now, clearer, fragmented words overlapping like a disjointed chorus. Lost. Stay. Ours. The path ended at a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center was something new, a massive, gnarled tree, its roots tangled and reaching like frozen waves. The bark was blackened, charred as if by fire, and its twisted branches seemed to scrape the sky. At its base was a hole, dark and yawning, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The pale woman was there, standing beside the tree. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel her pulling me forward, her smile as sharp as knives. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not going in there." She tilted her head, her expression almost curious. Then she raised one hand and pointed again, this time at the sky. I looked up, and froze. The stars were gone. The moon gone. The sky was a solid, suffocating black, as if the forest had swallowed the world itself. And in that darkness, dozens of eyes blinked open, glowing faintly red. They stared down at me, unblinking, watching. Something moved behind me, slow and deliberate, a heavy, dragging sound. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the trees. But their shadows were wrong, stretching toward me like grasping hands. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Let me go." The pale woman stepped closer, her movements slow and unnatural. Her eyes, black pits where her sockets should have been, locked onto mine. When she spoke, her voice was a low, hollow rasp, like dead leaves scraping against stone. "You can't leave," she said. "You brought it back." "I didn't bring anything," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what you want." Her smile widened, impossibly so. "You," she said simply. The ground beneath me split open, and I fell. I woke up in my bed. Again. The sunlight streaming through the window was warm and bright, but it felt wrong, too sharp, too sterile. I sat up, my head pounding, and looked around. The whispers were gone. The mud under my nails was gone. The house was quiet, peaceful. But when I looked out the window, all I could see were trees. Rows and rows of them, stretching endlessly in every direction. I wasn't in Matt's house anymore. I was in Whisperwood. And it wasn't letting me go. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the serene, peaceful quiet of the countryside, but the oppressive, suffocating stillness that made my skin crawl. No birds. No wind. Just me and the trees. I staggered to my feet, staring out the window at the endless forest. The house looked like Matt's place, same walls, same furniture, but outside was wrong. The driveway was gone. The street, the neighboring houses, everything beyond the window was trees. I grabbed my bag, my heart hammering, and headed for the front door. My hand shook as I turned the knob. It opened easily, no invisible force, no tricks. I stepped outside, clutching the strap of my bag like a lifeline. The forest surrounded me on all sides, impossibly dense and dark. It felt alive, the way the branches twisted and swayed without wind. I thought I saw faces in the bark, faint impressions of eyes and mouths, but when I looked directly, they vanished. I had no idea where to go. My instincts screamed to turn around, to lock myself inside and never leave. But I knew it wouldn't help. Whisperwood wanted me here. It wouldn't let me hide. So I picked a direction and started walking. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same, the path twisting and looping back on itself until I couldn't tell if I was making any progress. My phone was useless, no signal, no GPS, just the mocking glow of the home screen. I checked it anyway, desperate for some connection to the outside world. That's when I noticed the time. It said 2:14 p.m. That wasn't right. I'd left the house at what I thought was early morning, and the sun hadn't moved since. The light filtering through the branches was frozen, stuck in an eternal, golden haze. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and kept walking, the forest growing darker with each step. The whispers started again, faint at first, just a murmur at the edges of hearing. "Lost. Come closer. You belong here." I gritted my teeth, trying to block them out, but the words sank into my mind like hooks. The whispers weren't coming from any one direction. They were everywhere, weaving through the trees like smoke. Then I saw it. A figure stood ahead of me, pale and still, her long black hair hanging limp. The pale woman. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Not again." She didn't move. She just stood there, her back to me, her presence heavy and suffocating. I took a step back, then another, and tripped over something in the underbrush. It wasn't a root or a stone. It was soft, yielding, like flesh. I looked down and saw a face staring up at me. A man's face, twisted and gray, his eyes wide with terror. His body was half buried in the dirt, tangled in roots that pierced his skin like needles. The sight wrenched a scream from my throat, and I scrambled away, my hands digging into the earth. But the forest didn't let me go. More faces emerged from the ground, twisted and contorted in expressions of pain and fear. Men, women, children, their eyes lifeless and empty, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The roots writhed like snakes, pulling the corpses deeper into the earth. I couldn't breathe. My vision swam as the whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were a deafening roar. Then the pale woman turned. Her face was wrong, stretched and angular, her mouth a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. Her black eyes locked onto mine, and she smiled. "You belong here," she said. The ground opened beneath me. I woke up in the clearing. The gnarled tree loomed above me, its roots snaking across the ground like veins. The hole at its base was wider now, a dark, gaping maw that seemed to breathe. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of decay. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The roots held me fast, coiling around my arms and legs. The whispers were louder here, clearer, voices weaving together in an eerie harmony. "Stay. Join us. You are ours now." The pale woman stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me. Her smile was wide and unnatural, her teeth glinting in the dim light. She raised one hand, pointing at the tree. "No," I whispered, struggling against the roots. "Please, no." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tree answered for her. From the darkness of the hole, something moved. Something massive and slow, its shape obscured by shadows. Eyes blinked open, glowing faintly red, and a low, guttural growl rumbled through the air. The thing in the tree was alive. And it was hungry! The roots tightened, dragging me closer to the tree. I clawed at the dirt, screaming, but it was no use. The pale woman's smile grew wider, her hollow eyes gleaming with malice. The whispers reached a crescendo, a single, unified chant that echoed through the forest. "You belong to us." The last thing I saw was the darkness of the tree swallowing me whole. And then silence. When I woke up, I was back in the house. Whisperwood still surrounded me, the forest closer than ever. The whispers were gone, but I could feel them, inside me, under my skin, like roots digging deep. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't mean anything anymore. I can't leave. I can't sleep. The forest is alive, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I look into the mirror, I see her staring back. Smiling. The forest is quiet now. Too quiet. For what feels like days, weeks, I've sat in the house waiting. Whisperwood surrounds me, its presence suffocating but eerily still. The whispers have faded, but I can feel them lurking, like static in the back of my mind. I haven't eaten. I haven't slept. I barely even feel like I exist anymore. My reflection in the mirror looks wrong. My face is thinner, my eyes darker, my skin pale and stretched. Sometimes, when I glance at myself too quickly, I think I see her, the pale woman, staring back. But today is different. Today, I feel something change. The air grows heavy, pressing down on my chest. The trees outside seem to shift, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. And then, faintly, I hear it again. The whispers? Not faint, not murmurings at the edge of hearing. They're loud, insistent, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that fill the air with dread. They're calling me. I don't want to go. But my legs move anyway. The front door opens without a sound. The forest stretches before me, darker than I've ever seen it. The air smells of earth and decay, thick with the stench of something rotting beneath the surface. The path is clear this time, a straight line leading deeper into the woods. My feet move of their own accord, the whispers urging me forward. The trees close in around me, their branches twisting like skeletal arms. Faces appear in the bark, twisted, screaming faces with hollow eyes that follow me as I pass. I reach the clearing. The gnarled tree is there, its roots writhing like living things. The hole at its base is wider now, a massive, gaping maw that seems to pulse with every breath I take. The pale woman stands beside it, waiting. She smiles as I approach, her black eyes gleaming. "Welcome home." "I'm not yours," I say, my voice trembling. "I don't belong to you." Her smile widens, stretching impossibly far. "You already do." The whispers surge, louder than ever, a wave of sound that drowns out my thoughts. The ground trembles beneath my feet, and the tree begins to move. Its branches twist and crack, reaching upward like the limbs of a giant. The roots uncoil, tearing through the earth, dragging something massive out of the darkness. It isn't just a tree. It's alive. Eyes blink open across its bark, glowing red and full of malice. A mouth splits the trunk, jagged and filled with teeth that gleam like splinters of bone. The whispers erupt into a deafening roar as the tree thing lurches forward, its roots writhing toward me. I turn to run, but the forest is gone. The trees, the clearing, everything around me has disappeared into a swirling void of blackness. The pale woman laughs, her voice echoing like shattered glass. "There is no escape," she says. "You brought us here. Now you will stay." The roots wrap around my legs, dragging me toward the tree's mouth. I claw at the ground, but there's nothing to hold on to, nothing but the endless void. The whispers are inside me now, a chorus of voices screaming in my mind. "You belong to us. You are ours. Forever." And then, just as the tree's mouth looms above me, ready to swallow me whole, everything stops. Silence. The roots freeze, the whispers vanish, and the pale woman's laughter dies in her throat. The tree shudders, its red eyes flickering like dying embers. I look up and see something impossible: light. A blinding, golden light bursts through the darkness, searing through the void like fire. The tree recoils, its roots thrashing wildly, its bark splitting as the light pierces it. The pale woman screams, her body crumbling into ash. I don't know where the light comes from. I don't know why it's here. But I don't question it. I grab onto the nearest root and pull myself free, scrambling backward as the tree collapses into itself, consumed by the golden glow. The last thing I hear is the whispers, faint and distant, fading into nothing. And then silence. I wake up on the side of the road. It's morning. The sun is warm, the sky a brilliant blue. Cars rush past me, their drivers giving me strange looks. I'm covered in dirt, my clothes torn, my hands bloody, but I'm alive. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what happened to Whisperwood. When I turn to look, the forest is gone. Just an empty stretch of land, as if it never existed. But sometimes, at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone, I still hear them. The whispers. And I know it's not over.